The Grail is Canyon's new gravel bike. Following the introduction of the in-flight cyclocross bike earlier this year, I went to the launch a little bit cynically assuming that it was going to be a 650B version of that bike, but upon arriving I was presented with something that I really did not expect. So, elephant in the room, let's talk about those handlebars. The whole bike is built around what Canyon is calling its hover bar. Canyon is no stranger to integrated cockpits, but this is truly unlike anything I've seen before. As you've probably noticed, it's a double-decker system of sorts. The stem reaches out to a bar which connects the apex of both of the drops, from which you have your normal drop section at the bottom, but on top, the bar continues to float above the stem in what Canyon's calling its hover bar arrangement. The claimed benefit of this system is primarily increased compliance. So the top section of that handlebar has a genuinely noticeable amount of flex in it, an amount of flex that Canyon claims is 7 times more than its H31 integrated cockpits as seen on the Endurace and some of its other bikes. What's quite interesting about the hover bar setup is the way in which the setup affects the effective length of the stem. So with the hover bar sitting basically above midway on the stem, it actually shortens down the stem to roughly 75mm, again in the size medium I was testing. This is actually really quite short for a gravel bike, and I was really keen to see how it would ride. The bike is built around 700C 40mm wide tyres. Now Canyon stressed that that's the maximum tyre width, but I have a sneaking suspicion you'll definitely be able to fit something a bit wider in there. The carbon version of the Grail starts with a 105 build which comes in at €2,200, rising to €4,600 for an Ultegra Di2 equipped bike. There is also an aluminium version in the works, and we got to see some prototypes of that, but pricing and specs are all still to be confirmed. However, the bike is due to be available later this year. As with some of Canyon's other bikes, there is also a women's version, and this particular version only uses women's specific finishing kit. As with some of Canyon's other bikes though, the very smallest sizes do use 650B wheels. I flew to Nice in the south of France to try out the Canyon. We rode what could only be described in the strictest sense of the word, a whole bunch of gravel. There's no rowdy single track diversions, it was just very soft, very draggy, sandy gravel, which is the perfect terrain for something like the Grail. With those 40mm wide tyres, you're not going to be getting too rowdy on it, and it is designed for those longer days where you tend to be riding on fire roads and access roads and things that aren't, too rowdy. I can't say I'm honestly the biggest fan in the world of the Schwalbe G1 tyres. I think the lack of a shoulder knob really lets them down in the corners in particular. And on our wet day that we were riding, the sinky, sandy gravel was completely sapping any momentum, and I lost control a few times in the corners, but the bike certainly wasn't to blame here, and I would probably put it down to the tyres. Climbing, I was very thankful to have a 1-to-1 gear. Likewise, the Ultegra Di2 stuff was completely flawless. I've done some very long, very grimy gravel rides where mechanical group sets have faltered, and personally I do like Di2 in these situations. So the handlebars. But obviously the star of the show with the bike, and the first thing I did when jumping on the bike was putting my hands straight on the tops. And our ride started with a climb, and when climbing there is a genuinely noticeable amount of deflection from the handlebars. And throughout the day we tried out lots of different terrain, lots of rough descent, and I have to say, I honestly think the hover bar is probably the most comfortable carbon gravel cockpit I've ever used. With that said, it's very hard to get around the fact that it looks absolutely bizarre, and I caught myself looking down and thinking, where on earth am I supposed to put my hands with the bars the whole day long? Another supposed advantage of the hover bar is that funny bar which sits between the apex of both of the drops. Now Canyon claims that by allowing you to basically hook your thumbs around that bar, you improve control in the descents. For me that worked quite well. I've got relatively big hands, but some of the other testers on the day did comment that with shorter hands it was quite difficult to reach the levers on descents. Now obviously there is a degree of adjustment with brake levers, even with hydraulic levers, but how much of an issue this would be for someone with smaller hands remains to be seen. One thing I will absolutely say you should not do with the hover bar is grab that bar with both of your hands, because you will absolutely break your wrists if you crash. The bars do come with a GPS mount, and this sits just underneath that bar which goes between both of the drops, and this works completely fine if you don't have a handlebar bag on the bike, which Canyon will sell you to go with the bike. The GPS is completely obscured, which is obviously an issue, particularly if you're doing some kind of adventurous ride and you need some degree of navigation. Now with all of that said, I should stress, I do like the hover bars, sort of. I think they're a genuinely comfortable cockpit in a quite unique way. The flex is quite tamed. It doesn't feel noodly at the front. It doesn't feel like I could bend them in any kind of meaningful way. But there's obviously issues there which need to be ironed out, and whether or not they'll be an issue for you just depends on how you want to use the bars. The cynic in me also can't help but feel that that hover bar is just an excuse to not have a horrible super high rise stem or a massive head tube. If I was forced to make my mind up about what I think of the Grail at this early stage, I'd probably say that I admire Canyon, which is a pretty mainstream brand, for doing something that is so genuinely unique. I think the Grail is something like a vision of the future in some ways. The bike is pretty far out there, the cockpit is even further out there, and the look of the overall thing is odd. You're either going to love the way the Grail looks or you're going to hate it, and that's probably going to be the deciding factor for many people deciding whether or not they want to buy one. But what I can assure you, even with my limited time on the bike, is that it rides in a genuinely good way. It's a properly fast, properly futuristic, and genuinely unique gravel bike, and I'm looking forward to spending more time on it.